Hopefully everyone could see me and hear me all right. I'm Miles Davis from DXC Technology, and I'm here with some chums from Illumio and Appgate to talk about some really interesting parts of Zero Trust and the Zero Trust journey that everyone's on. We're going to be not covering absolutely everything in Zero Trust because it's enormous, but we're going to focus in on two important areas: Zero Trust network access, and we've got Jim from Appgate on from that, and we're going to talk about micro-segmentation as well. And we've got Paul in from Illumio. So as I said, I'm Miles Davis, I'm at DXC Technology, and I head up the infrastructure part of cybersecurity from an offerings point of view at DXC Technology. I've been there a few years, and before that, I spent the last sort of 30 years in cyber operations. So that's my background. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Paul Schofield. I'm a Senior Partner Systems Engineer with Illumio, and I've worked extensively with Appgate and DXC.
And we've got Jim.
Thanks, Miles. Yep, good to be here. Thank you, everyone, for taking a few minutes to join us with this webinar. I actually have been with Appgate for almost a decade now, believe it or not. I run the global solutions practice for Appgate. My team is instrumental in helping customers be successful with not only Appgate, but the integrations that we do with other partners of ours like Illumio.
Cool. Okay, cheers, guys. So it's important I've got these guys on with me today because, as I said, these are the two very big parts of Zero Trust. Normally, when I've been speaking to customers, and do that quite a lot at the moment about their Zero Trust journeys, the thing that they focused on to start with is identity, which is a really good thing to do. It's a very rich part, and it helps you sort of understand the concept of Zero Trust. So we're gonna park identity a little bit today, and we're gonna go and move on to two other parts that I said that are really important to us, and that's Zero Trust network access and micro segmentation. So from a point of view of these two things that we're going to cover, Appgate SDP is a leader in this area now. SDP stands for Software Defined Perimeter, and it's something that we use in DXC ourselves as well as help customers with it. And what's great about, and the reason why we're doing this with Appgate now, is that it really does fully embrace those Zero Trust network access principles, if you like. So it's more than just VPN point 2.0. It's effectively, it lives and breathes those concepts. So for instance, the idea of least privileged access all the time. The other great thing is it focuses in on what it calls SPA, which is this single packet authentication. So each time you ask for anything back inside that private network, it reevaluates whether you actually should have access to it and only gives you access to that period when you need it. The other thing is the concept of cloaked infrastructure, which is effectively means you can't attack what you can't see. So certainly when you're putting together like a platform for Appgate, you don't advertise where those endpoints are from a VPN point of view. So in the old days, you used to have a public certificate and a public IP for your VPN gateway. All that goes away with Appgate. And we've got Paul on as well from Illumio. So from a segmentation point of view, we've all been doing segmentation for years. Segmentation from a north-south point of view and segmentation from a network point of view. We're all familiar of the firewall sandwich that is a DMZ, and we're all familiar with splitting things up in VLANs and stuff. But in actual fact, things have gone on more than that. And those things aren't good enough anymore. Now, if you're from an operations background like me, and you've worked in data centers, and you understood the virtualization platforms in there, you'll understand that it's actually pretty much impossible to micro-segment workloads within those environments without another tool, and something like Illumio really sings at this particular thing, because otherwise you just get yourselves into a nightmare of IP plumbing, and it's just, take it from me, I have the scars. So what we look at market trends when we're talking to people, this first one's been and gone. We've seen it. Basically, we all saw that VPNs effectively were outmoded when the pandemic hit. So I was in charge of a lot of operations at the time, and all of a sudden I had a platform for 120,000 users that was scaled to take about 30, 40,000, because that was kind of enough of a ratio to take things in. But it wasn't enough when we sent everybody home to work. And everybody did that everywhere. So we soon realized that this whole concept of VPNs were just outmoded. The fact that they were static and they couldn't scale was just a real problem. But there's also fundamentally the fact that VPNs, which we thought were great at the time, especially when we strongly authenticated you, VPNs were just not up to it. So effectively, we were giving people access to entire cities by letting them through the front door once. And really, we only wanted them to give them access to the kitchen and the back bedroom and maybe a public park, and that was it. But we weren't doing that, and we didn't embrace the ideas of just-in-time access and just enough access. So we talked to a lot of people out there all the time, and 78% now are saying they're looking to embrace a zero trust model. And as I said, certainly people will start with identity, which is a really good thing to do. And they move on towards that zero trust model. And we've got more and more people, because of since the pandemic, moving towards the zero trust network access model. But what we haven't had so much is people fully embracing micro-segmentation. Now, some of that is because people aren't understanding it fully. Some of it is because they don't really get that sort of concept of things, and feel that in some cases that they are segmenting because they're north-south segmenting, but they're not yet aware of the bonus you get if you can actually secure workloads themselves and micro segment. So where we fit in as DXC is we're a big sort of like GSO, where we're global and local, which is a great thing, I think, working for DXC, is that we embrace this concept of this global reach, but with a very, very local knowledge point of view. So I'm going to hand over now to Paul, and he's going to talk a little bit about Illumio, and then we're going to talk through how the products work, how they interact with each other, and how the three companies, DXC, Illumio, and Appgate, can make things far better on that journey for zero trust.
Thank you very much, Miles. This is Paul Schofield. You can hear me okay? Thank you for coming today. Just wanted to start off by talking a little bit about the latest Forrester report. This is a micro-segmentation market analysis, and we're very pleased to report that we are the strongest current offering and have the strongest strategy. So I want to show a little bit of some of the quotes that came out of that, Miles. The Forrester evaluator actually had to dial his quotes back a little bit. He wanted to call us the original gangster of the micro-segmentation, but some of these are great. The bottom one is particularly relevant. If anybody who's on a zero trust journey should be bolstering defense against ransomware, should have Illumio on the top of their short list. So give us a look. We can give you a deeper dive. We are focused on micro-segmentation. We've been around for 11 years. We're still a startup. We're growing and improving every day. And we're very proud of the fact of the improvements we've made recently. Next slide, please. So what about prevention? I really feel myself that we're in post-prevention, that prevention is always going to get compromised, whether it's undocumented, unauthorized intrusion, the attackers can lurk for months at a time. But the attack has to spread. Very, very rarely do they get on what they want to get on exactly the first time. They have to move laterally across the organization. They can actually, most networks you can get from wherever you get into, wherever you want to go. Next slide, next one. They want to eventually end in critical assets being compromised, whether locking the systems or exfiltrating data. So Illumio takes a look at this attack model and really focuses on what the point in the middle. Next, please. Hyperconnected multi-cloud lateral movement is the biggest risk, and we can exactly stop that movement with Illumio. Next slide. So how does Illumio work? What we do is we show you what's actually happening based on your applications. So you might have an application that's communicating from your point of sale to your backend database, from your user realm to a cloud organization. You can put that all on a map. We find that many times it's the first time that everybody in the organization has actually been able to actually see a map of what's going on with application traffic. And based on that traffic, oh, we don't want the dev to go to prod. We don't want to have this endpoints be able to communicate with the servers. We set a policy, and we use those policies to stop the spread. So see the risk, set the policy, stop the spread. Next one,
So
please.
Paul, on
Yes.
that, I was going to ask you, I was going to say, so the point of view where I've come from before, and I think it's worth sort of like calling out as well, is the different sort of thing that with Illumio, and the fact that what you've described there, we could say a lot of the big like firewall vendors and the virtualization sort of platform people say, yeah, we can do that. We can do all that. But this, the way Illumio does it is unique. Do you want to just give us a bit more on that?
Sure, it's all plain English language syntax. So you'll see things, you don't have to remember VLANs or CIDR rules or anything like that. You very quickly get The manufacturing area is talking to the ransomware site. The ransomware site has gotten into the point of sale. You use the names that your business team would use, and you can see it very clearly in the maps. I was an incident response commander at a very large company for a number of years. I had a problem with my manufacturing area getting infected by ransomware, and I couldn't say, isolate the manufacturing area. I had to go talk to my network team, and they had 37 different VLANs across 6 geographies. And 45 minutes later, we didn't have something to shut off. We just had an argument about where the manufacturing environment really was. So Illumio gives you the nouns you need to very quickly say, I want to shut this off. I want to see how this connects very quickly and succinctly.
That's great. I mean, yeah, no, absolutely. It takes me back to when I first got handed sort of like the keys, if you like, to a large corporate network. When I asked people, okay, can I have a picture just so I can see at least the ingress and the egress points for a start, and see what some of the dependencies are, and everyone sort of like laughed and thought, silly guy, and I was like, no, really, can I see it, please? And there wasn't anything, and I said, how can we manage something we can't even draw? And it was a case of like, yeah, because it's grown through time, through acquisitions and mergers. And I think the great thing that I like about Illumio is that in this particular way, what you can do is you can deploy Illumio sort of like partially, just a few VENs here and there, and you can start to build up that picture. And that to me is really important. I think it's because I think in pictures, but I can then start to see and visualize my network. Start by visualizing it, and then the next thing is I can actually move on and start seeing those dependencies before I apply any policy enforcement. And that, because I'm an ops guy, is really important to me. I want to understand that if a server in Cleethorpes, that's in the north of England, by the way, is talking to a data center in Singapore, because I have no idea that's actually happening, and there's a critical dependencies there. The amount of times I was called in the middle of the night to deal because a firewall rule broke something is just like, I don't even want to think about it. So this idea that you can get all this in with Illumio, as you said, you can, the syntax is English language, you label those things. That's Paul's app, that's Jim's app, that's Miles's app. Never the twain shall meet. And they can sit in these bubbles that are labeled. Is just so much easier, especially once you're in those sort of like service type issue things. So yeah, no, that for me is something that is really important, I think, and Illumio does really well. First, you can see it. Second, you can then work out what you're going to do before you actually do it. Then you can get everyone together and say, right, today, guys, we're put the fence down. The portcullis is coming down at that point, and you can really work that out beforehand. I think I've taken more of a beating for service incidents than I have for security incidents in my lifetime. So service is very, very important to me. I'll move you on to the next one, Paul.
Thank you, Miles. That was really accurate. So where does it all fit? We're seeing the micro-segmentation, NSA's Zero Trust Maturity actually calls us out. We're part of the networking and environment pillar, data flow mapping, which we just talked about. Miles gave an excellent description. Macro segmentation, we can say things like no dev device will talk to a production device, or micro segmentation down to the individual host, because it's all software defined labeling and it's very flexible. It's also very fast to do and very easy. Advance to the next slides. So there are a lot of different policies. We've got Executive Office of the President, next one. DoD and references instruction. Everything's sort of pointing towards this software-based version of microsegmentation. We do have DORA notes. If any of these things that you see, if you want to send us to the webinar, we can show you their DORA compliance. Keep going, next slide. DORA. And this is Zero Trust, NIST 800-207, cybersecurity. SWIFT. SWIFT is very important to us. We found very early on that many of our banks were very interested in protecting their SWIFT environment. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say with the DORA one is one that DXC we get asked a lot. Obviously, we're big in the banking sort of field, so anything that comes across sort of and with standards, each time something comes in, it goes up a notch, if you like. I can remember years ago with the first sort of like PCI compliance, it's so different then to what it is now with the extra things. And I think actually, if you look on the matrix for implementing for being compliant to DORA, it now actually mentions about evidencing your ability to segment and how have you done that. So if you've got something like Illumio in there at that point, you're kind of you've got your tick in your box that you can show you're doing it sort of properly. And it's very difficult to do, without that.
Very much plain English language. So we are across the hybrid estate. Many customers ask what sort of efficiencies can we pick up, everything from a mainframe through physical servers, either whether they're in the cloud or in your data center, any endpoints, containers, whether they're in the cloud or in the data center, and whether it's cloud native or infrastructure as a service, we can actually go through without an agent, read through any of the clouds. So it's one platform across the board. Miles, any questions before we move to Jim?
Just so could you give us the difference thing? So when I first got involved with Illumio, it was very much the initial core product. So it was the adoption of putting a VEN onto an endpoint, so onto a server, which then drives the firewall on those devices, so that you're not becoming like a big overhead on something. There's no man in the middle. So you've got a nice, from a service point of view, it works sort of kind of well. But now you've moved to cloud-based platform, that's kind of changed, isn't it? Do you want to just go through how that's different with your Illumio cloud?
Sure. We've always worked in the cloud with being able to put our VEN, our small agent. It's like a 22 megabyte, like a printer driver. It's a very lightweight agent. And what it does is it reads the flow from a workload, and then you're able to put controls in place, and it passes it down to the local firewall. And we've always done that in a virtual data center, but we had customers who coming to us saying, we want to be able to explore the cloud native platform. We want to be able to go through and say, my customer has a hybrid cloud. Some of it's infrastructure as a service they could put a VEN on, but they want to do it without any VENs or agentless. So what we do is we read the metadata from the cloud and the flows, and we'll build a map and a cloud enforcement for you in any one of the clouds that we have right now. We have two that we do. We do AWS, and we do Azure. We're soon to be doing Google Cloud Platform, GCP.
That's great. And then the other thing I think really powerful on there is it that person gives their read-only access to their tenant to the Illumio product, and it can start, we talked earlier about drawing that map and understanding those dependencies without deploying a single thing, pretty much.
And it takes less than 48 hours. So on the core side, it's a bit of, you do have to install agents, so there is that impediment. But on the cloud side, you're able to go in very quickly and get a good, accurate view of what's in their cloud inventory. And most of the organizations are very confused about their cloud. It came up haphazardly. It hasn't been fully monitored by the security team or the application teams. It just sort of is what it is. So we're able to find a lot of things on the cloud side.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Paul. Right, I'm going to move us on there to. Are you done there, Paul, do you think? Or is there anything else you want to add?
I am, yes. I think we can move on to.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate. We're going to move you on to Jim, and he's going to talk about how Appgate integrates with all that.
Perfect. Thank you, Miles. So Paul is a expert on the Illumio side of the house and can probably talk for hours about how Illumio actually works and some of the unique capabilities under the covers. Similarly, I can do the same thing with Appgate. So I could go on for an hour about what single packet authorization is and how it prevents unauthorized access, talking about some of the unique differentiators with the Appgate SDP product, including the concept of direct routed versus a cloud routed approach. But fundamentally, I'm here to talk about really Appgate's approach to integrating with Illumio. So let's dive deeply into this as quick as we can. Appgate is the mechanism that is used predominantly to control traffic into the environment that Illumio is protecting from an east-west perspective. So think about Appgate as your north-south access control mechanism. Appgate can make sure that the right user under the right circumstances on the right device has access to a subset of the applications within the environment based on that person's role or their job function. And this is, as Miles mentioned, the principle of least privilege that we're implementing. Being able to combine elements of information from the user's identity along with their network connection, along with attributes about their device before we let them access some of those things. Ultimately, access is defined as some port, protocol, and IP address within a data center, whether it's a physical data center or a cloud-based region or whatever. That's ultimately how you define that access. But the trick of it is, what if I had access to metadata that Illumio is aware of and using to define these various properties that Paul mentioned, such as your web-based applications or your production-based applications. What if Appgate could take advantage of some of that metadata and marry it up to elements of information from the end user's identity management presence? So, for example, on the screen, you can see I've got a user on the left. There is an Appgate claim. Once that user authenticated, the claim for their group membership is populated from the identity management system, and that group membership contains dbadmin as an example. Well, wouldn't it be great if the Appgate gateway could then query the Illumio PCE and say, hey, I've got a user here that's a member of the dbadmin group. I need to grant them access to the database instances within the environment, but not necessarily the web instance or the processing instance or anything like that. So I want to limit what they have access to based on their job function. And that's exactly what we've done with Appgate. So we've got a deep integration where we take advantage of Illumio's API capabilities. We can actually query the Illumio PCE via API calls that are embedded in the Appgate product to pull that level of information back. So let's, this is not just slideware. This is actually in production and living and breathing. Miles, pop over to the next slide real quick before I do a demo. And happy to engage Paul on this as well. So we've got, at least one joint customer. We've got several of them out there, but a really important one is the Defense Intelligence Agency, where they're actually using Appgate to control user traffic into the various environments, but then they're actually leveraging Illumio to control traffic between servers and services within those environments. It ends up being a complete 360-degree approach to network access, both north-south as well as east-west, combining these two best-of-breed products in the form of Appgate SDP and Illumio. Paul, anything else you'd like to add to this particular use case?
No, it's just, it makes a complete picture without the two together. It's they can escape and move east-west. So with the two of us together, it's very, very good.
I always think of those as being those two sides of the same coin. So people are sort of like, certainly when I speak to customers out there, they get the identity part, they get the zero trust network access part, but there is less adoption of the micro segmentation part, and it is the bit that's missing on there. But the good thing is they do offer the same thing. So once you've got your zero trust goggles on, the idea from an Appgate point of view is that you're only getting access to the things you really need to get access, and just for the time you need to do them at very low privilege. That's great. But it's like, well, actually, let's look at that in reverse. Let's do exactly the same from the point of view of the infrastructure rather than the user or the entity getting access to it. The infrastructure doesn't need to access absolutely everything. The infrastructure only needs to access what it needs to, just like the user. And that's the Illumio hub. So you bring those two together, you have a partner like DXC, obviously, to help you through that, and it just works wonders.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Miles, for that. Let's, if you will, let's pop into a quick demo here, and I'll show you Appgate and Illumio operating together in a live fashion. Let me try to share my screen. And here you can see, if I minimize my zoom, here, let's just pop over here. So this is my Illumio dashboard. I'm actually running my own Illumio PCE within my demo environment. And I suppose I should have done a quick screen check. Miles or Paul, can you confirm you can see my screen I'm sharing?
Yes, we're
Yeah,
good.
can I just stop the share? That's good, yeah.
Perfect. So this is my PCE running in my demo environment. I've got several protected workloads. Let's go and explore the Illumio map very quickly. So you can see I've got an AWS Northern Virginia deployment. Within that Northern Virginia deployment, I've got a QA set of applications and a production set of applications. And Illumio is a force enforcing the rules and policies that allow my QA environment to stay contained and separated from my production environment. And those are basic east-west rules that are being applied to this environment. In other words, the QA red application, the app, the web, and the database instances, they can talk to each other. that's what's being enforced by the Illumio side. Likewise, in the blue application, it's got various components that can talk there, and they can't mix and match in between, even though they're on the same subnet, running in the same region in that cloud environment. So how does Appgate come into play with this? Well, in my Appgate world, I am actually a QA employee. And so simulating that QA employee, this is my Appgate client. I've already authenticated and connected. I was analyzed. I was given access to some entitlements. Let's look at a few of those. So here I've got an entitlement to Illumio QA Northern Virginia for the site Northern Virginia. And I'm allowed TCP access on ports 80 and 22, as well as ICMP access of all types under the condition always. But what instances do I get access to? And this is where the rubber meets the roads in terms of the integration. So in this scenario, I'm not defining 10.201.4.9 as the IP address that Jim, the user, the QA user, gets access to, or .7 or .8. I'm actually defining what he has access to based on an Illumio query that's being executed by the Appgate gateway against the Illumio PCE running in my environment. This is basically saying, go and find all of the IP addresses that have a label of QA and a label of AWS Northern Virginia, and give Jim access to those things. So here you can see in the background on the Illumio map, there's the AWS Northern Virginia label, and here's the QA label. So based on this entitlement, I should be granted access to these 3 IP addresses. So let's randomly grab one, 10.201.4.7, and let's see what that looks like if I try to ping that destination. Yep, no problem. I can ping that. You can see it flowing through. If I try to ping the .8, which is the web or the app service running in that database instance or in that environment, and then .9 is the database instance, I can ping all 3 of them, and it's because those IP addresses meet the metadata query, the QA, and the AWS Northern Virginia. So now the question becomes, why is this important? Why is this valuable? Well, what this enables an organization to do is define access based on the metadata that is managed and controlled by Illumio, but extend that access control all the way out to the end users. So the example here is I've left my my ping to that database engine running, the 4.9 is still running. Let's just pretend that I want to take 4.9 as a workload and I want to move it over to production for some reason, right? So let's go and look at my workloads and let's find 4.9. There it is. And let's click on that. And I'm going to come in and say, I'd like to edit this 4.9 instance. I'm going to actually take it out of QA by removing the QA label and add a production label. So what's happening here is I'm actually going to change that label in real time on the Illumio side. I'm not touching Appgate in any way. I'm not updating my end user. I'm not telling him he's got something new or old or whatever. Let's go back and look at the map. And now if I rerun this query to redraw the map, we should see in Northern Virginia that my production application now includes that 10.201.4.9. Well, under this no longer meets the query that allows Jim to access that destination. And if I flip back over to my ping, you can see that that ability for me to actually reach that destination has been removed. As a user, I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to refresh my user tokens. I didn't have to log out and log in. Nobody had to make any phone calls. My ability to access this .9 destination is purely based on the metadata coming out of Illumio. And if that metadata changes, then my ability to access it will be modified appropriately. Similarly, I could go back to the Illumio environment, go back in and say, oh, wait, that was a mistake. That database should not be part of production. Let's move it back over to QA. So let's go and simulate that work, right? So here we are. Here's 10.201.4.9. I'm going to edit this instance, remove the production label, and add the QA label back in place. And I will hit save. And now that's being pushed back out to that instance. So let's Alt-Tab back over to that ping command that's been left running. And again, it takes a second or so for that to happen, but just like magic, suddenly I have access to it. It's back into that QA mode. Jim, the QA guy, now has access to it. So I could, break out of my ping and I could SSH to it. 10.201.4.9. Remember, that was part of that entitlement, granting me TCP port 22 access to it as well. And so there you go. I'm now in 10.201.4.9. I could run my update. I could run my database query. I could manage the environment based on the job title that I have. But that's it. That's the demo. And if you've got any questions about how this happened, or what might have happened under the covers, happy to dig a little deeper through the Q&A session. Be sure and get your questions posted in that Q&A window. Miles, that's the demo. Back to you.
Cool. Let's put this on and put the share back up. Great stuff. All right, thanks for that, Jim. So yeah, useful to see those the integrations between the two, and it's funny that seems to be what is certainly lighting people up a bit more. So we'll sometimes be sort of help out the sales teams at DXC, and we'll come on and talk to various customers. And we were talking the other week to some again in the States, which means late nights for me, and we were talking to one customer about the about Illumio and about microsegmentation, because they were very much that we've done zero trust on a journey, but we haven't tackled this part. And I went through and talked to them about how Illumio works and did those things, and I could see it wasn't really necessarily kind of going anywhere until I happened to mention, because they just made a huge investment in ServiceNow, and I happened to mention, oh, did you know, by the way, you can use the CMDB that you populate in ServiceNow to help drive your plain English labeling for your Illumio. That was it. All of a sudden, brilliant. So anyone, certainly which I like working with Appgate and Illumio, is because of those integrations. But anyone who's sort of reaching out across those things and getting away from that traditional kind of lock-in, it's certainly sort of getting more favor with customers, which is interesting, because when you speak to everyone, that what they're all saying is we want fewer vendors, we want fewer people involved. But actually, they do want the stuff that they've got to be able to talk with other things and to be able to integrate with things. So there is a kind of like, there's an idea that we're all going to go a single vendor on all these sort of things, but in actual fact, and certainly, best of breed often means bag of spanners. It's just like no sort of thing. So where we see these trends and people saying, oh, this is definitely what we're doing, it's not always strictly true. And you need to sort of like talk to them a bit more and sort of to tease those sort of things out. So I'm going to move on.
Yep.
About
hey Miles, real quickly, hit your swap displays button. You're showing the speaker side.
Yeah, what's going on now? Sorry, look at this. This is a guy who uses Teams, you see. Now he's trying to do this 2 ticks. Share again.
And while Miles is doing that, hopefully that little demonstration made sense to the audience. The idea there is that, you can really control not only your east-west traffic, but also your north-south traffic through the use of the Illumio labels. So you're really managing the access control through a single tool, while, to Miles's point, you're actually leveraging multiple vendors to do that. They're completely integrated in that regard. Much better, Miles. I love that screen.
Yeah, okay. That's a bit better. Yeah. We'll just ignore the fact that I can't drive Zoom for 5 minutes. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. Yeah. So DXC Technology have been around for a while. So we are often, I think it's been said, it's like not everybody knows it out there. So, which is quite interesting, because it's an incredibly broad and deep company, being the birth of so many different mergers that sort of come in. But importantly, I like the fact that the 3,500 plus number of cybersecurity experts only ever goes up. So I haven't seen that go down since I've been about 2 years or so. So that's only going up, which is brilliant news. We talked about identity before and how important that is with zero trust, and we're recognised by Cooper & Cole as the best sort of like out there for identity providing from this sort of point of view. As ever, you'd expect us to have many, many global clients out there as well, and the fact that we are an MSSP as well. But importantly as well, the other one that seems to be growing as well is our Security Operations Centre. We've recently had one open in Madrid and now one in Italy, in Bari. But again, this is part of that concept of being sort of like global and local at the same time, which I really like. And the other thing as well is, which I really like, which is kind of not anything to do with technology at all in the slightest. But from where I used to work and where I've come in, it's incredibly non-hierarchical within DXC, which does mean it is a bit simpler sometimes to get things done and to talk to the right people, because people aren't quite so interested in who works for who and in what line you're in, which I find really, really refreshing. So our take on what we of security is that, you know, rather than trying to sell snake oil effectively and sort of say, yeah, we're going to protect you completely, it's not really about that. And zero trust's like key messages are that you should assume breach. Now, it doesn't mean to say, you know, panic and start screeching, but it's just about resilience. So how fast do you get off the canvas once you've been knocked down? And that's what it's really about. And certainly within, we're really focusing quite hard now on the sort of what I call the R space. Now, the reason I'm going to call it the R space is because it's, if I say MDR, someone will say, well, surely you mean XDR or METDR or EDR. And it's now expanded so big with threat and everything else, is the fact that it's all about response, or I call it the R. So this has gone from effectively thinking about people just dealing with antivirus on a server to a full-blown like cyber fusion platform. So we're not just taking feeds from within IT areas. We're also looking at the path of shipping containers, geopolitical results, weather, all the things that can come in and sort of like combine within a modern SOC. And that's where something where DXC plays really, really heavily. So when we think about zero trust sort of maturity, and this is where I'll ask the guys to sort of like chip in or sort of around this, it affects everything on that one side. And it sounds a bit like if I sort of say, oh yeah, zero trust, it's a journey. You can smell the patchouli oil. I'm sounding like a sort of a burnout from the 60s. It's a journey. But the fact is, it's actually multiple journeys. And you can cut it up and chop it up in different ways. And I think it's really, really important with something like zero trust, not to sort of like do the politics of fear on it and say, you've got to do this, you're going to get breached, this is going to happen. And rather turn that around and try and make that slightly more collaborative and more positive focused, and say things like, okay, you first adopt by moving, understanding privilege within your identities. You move on to zero trust network access. No more broad, deep access, just access to what you need when you need it. And you start to embrace the concept of segmentation as well. And you go along those journeys through different areas. Don't sort of think that you have to try and boil the ocean, do everything at once. You will shift the dial, if you like, the needle rather, on that dial towards better posture just by taking on certain things. Obviously, it only takes, you know, the bad guys just have to get it right once, and us on the inside have to get it right all the time. It's a different story, but you should sort of think of it in a way of, right, okay, then this is programmatical. These are multiple journeys, and we will measure success sort of as we go through. But certainly splitting up through these this way. And if I think about zero trust, say 3 years ago to now, it is easier because people like NIST have started to issue frameworks around it, whereas before it was pretty much a concept only. You can't go out and buy a zero trust. It was a concept which you tried to fit things around. At least now it's a concept with a framework, and there is some scaffolding, if you like, or some structure about how you can go on that journey and apply those things. I mean, Jim, what do you hear when you're speaking to people out there?
I really do talk to a lot of prospects and customers that recognize this journey aspect. And to me, I think Illumio and Appgate SDP lend themselves well to getting started in an easy, simplified way that has meaning upfront, right? So, for example, the idea of implementing multi-tunneling from your end user's perspective right away with even simple policies and a network overlay. You're not going to have to re-architect the network to take advantage of some of that. And yet you can eliminate single points of failure, get encryption across the board for every application, and handle your end user authentication and access requests no matter where they sit. So there's some interesting benefits there. But the technologies at play with Appgate and Illumio also allow you to get deeper into the deployment by further restricting access by limiting things from broad subnet-like principles to individual IP addresses, individual ports and protocols. You know, I might want to allow a set of users to access a particular server on the web ports in one instance based on a group that they belong to, but I might want to shift gears and allow the IT admins to access the same server on a different set of ports. And so, you know, there's different nuances that you can do there. Likewise, on the Illumio side, you know, you might want to adjust things based on the project team or the other labels and metadata that's associated with the various aspects of your applications that are running in the environment. And maybe, Paul, you've got some things to dig into there in terms of advancing from a traditional initial deployment to a more advanced and optimal outcome.
You can very much define where you want to take your how detailed you want to be at different levels. It's not an all or nothing approach. We actually have quite flexible. The fact that we allow flexible labels allows you to do things like say, I don't want anybody from my PCI environment to talk, my regular environment to talk into my PCI environment. Or we have an airline that says, I don't want anything to let anybody talk to my refueling application unless they're part of the refueling application. So you can create custom labels that will allow you to slice this up any way you want. And then when we get to the detailed micro segmentation, maybe in your financial apps, you want to do very detailed micro segmentation. It's all there and it's easy to do. So you might have more segmentation in various areas than you have in others.
The great thing there is what you say, Paul, is the fact that it's English, the labeling, you know, or however you want to put it in there, rather than you're going to have to be a network admin. You're going to have to know the server names, the IP addresses of everything, not just the ports and protocol, absolutely everything. But you're going to have to be an absolute expert within the infrastructure to even start thinking about how you stop that stuff going into the PCI environment or out again. But with Illumio, you then, you know, you can then say this is all part of that, and it's in English and it's labeled in such a way that you can start to understand that, and it's so much easier from that point of view. Certainly from what I've seen. So I'm going to move us on a bit here to something that's obviously important to me, because this is a success story with Appgate. Now, we had a lot of learning from within DXC Technology of adopting Appgate as our sort of like our ZTNA private access platform. And there's a few reasons why we went with Appgate. So certainly there was a lot of the stuff which Jim has spoken about already, and the customers they already had on there. And the great thing was as well, is we were able to adapt this by bringing it in and learning as well. And we've done a deal with a major US oil company who we're helping with Appgate as well. And they've absolutely embraced zero trust from the bottom up, to the point that they are saying that nobody will access anything unless it is through Appgate, regardless of whether they're on an offshore rig or in their grandmother's back bedroom. The equivalence of access will be exactly the same, and they will go through that. And they've even done that with their own bespoke entitlements engine. Now, the beauty there about Appgate is because Appgate can interface with those things. It's incredibly extensible, and that's one of the reasons why DXC picked it. So DXC had, I think it was 3 or 4 separate VPN platforms on different technologies, because of the fact that it was built from mergers of different companies and everybody had their favorites at the time. To be able to get rid of that, imagine all those VPN clients trying to coexist on people's machines depending on what applications they wanted to access was an absolute nightmare. But we also had some other niche cases, some of them a bit embarrassing about IP addressing, and then we also had some old legacy protocols that were based around mainframes. So DXC do an awful lot in the insurance industry, and in finance and insurance, there's a lot of mainframe backends. We have applications that absolutely interface with them, and they would have trouble even with a traditional full IP path IPsec VPN. So you try and do that with some sort of proxied access or with other ZTNA vendors, that stuff just won't work, because you can't do that sort of server initiated traffic that goes back through. But with Appgate, it was like, just show us the app, we'll stick it in our lab, we'll roll our sleeves up, and we'll get to work on it. So we had a really good relationship with them, which helped us get off of all those old platforms, and it really did sort of like kickstart the zero trust sort of journey for DXC themselves. So we've been going for 45 minutes now. I've been talking. Hopefully I've put everyone to sleep. We're going to push over to Q&A, and hopefully hopefully there'll be a few questions there to which we can ask, and hopefully, as I say, people are still waiting, and I've enjoyed the chat. What have we got? Is Aidan there? Is he going to reel off the any questions we've got?
I see one that's here to Illumio. What the question is asking whether or not there's a network infrastructure required for the Illumio side, specifically for things that might not touch Appgate. And then they go into an example of two IoT devices that shouldn't be able to communicate. I'll answer that question for you. Illumio works independent of network infrastructure. So many of the problems that we see with some of the current generation firewalls is that you have to do what we call a hairpin. So if two devices are in a rack and they have to be separated by a firewall, you have to go out through the firewall for traffic and then back into the machine right side by side in a rack. With Illumio, it's all application labels. It doesn't matter if all the devices are sitting in the same rack or if they're in different parts of the world. We can enforce it with regardless of network infrastructure. Then there's a subcase in the second part of the question, which was IoT devices. What if two IoT devices shouldn't be allowed to communicate? We can, because IoT devices can't wear an agent. We're not able to separate IoT devices from each other, with the exception of we can write switch ACLs for you based on our policies using a device called the NEN. So we can write a switch ACL to keep two devices separate, but usually we go for the macro use case, which is even worse. We prevent IT infrastructure from touching IoT infrastructure. So the example is you might have a MRI and you don't want anybody to be able to talk to the MRI except for your people who are actually the MRI service team. So you can say a default policy that nobody can talk to the MRI or any of the medical devices, and then create the exceptions. It says everybody who's on a PC who that has access to it can come in. So you set up an access for maybe 4 or 5 people. That works really well with the auditors because you can actually show in plain English language, this is the policy, nobody's allowed, and this is the times we had to put exceptions to the policy over the last month.
So interesting on the IT IoT sort of like space. It's an area that interests us sort of greatly. We're doing a lot of work in cyber and OT environments. DXC traditionally had a long sort of like pedigree within that industry 4.0 and the MES PLM type stuff. So we're doing a lot of work on the security side of that. And it's funny because when speaking to people about OT sort of devices, they will mention the ISO model of 62443, which is like the Purdue model, if you like, which everyone there feels, oh no, yeah, that's all segmented, because you go from layer 0 with the process control stuff all the way up to sort of like layer 5 where the internet sort of like meets it, and never the twain shall meet, and you have these things separate. However, everything within those stripes, if you like, within the Purdue model can often just talk to everything else. It's a big flat VLAN at that time. Yes, certain things are segmented off, but it's big and flat. And you've got a lot of you've got equipment that lasts 20 years. So you've got an embedded XP image within there, which you can't change on a 20 million pound robot unless you change out a system card that costs 15 million. So you're just not going to. So you've got to somehow keep that XP machine. You know it's full of holes, but you've got to keep it safe, and you've got to segment sort of things off of there. So we're starting definitely to see micro segmentation taking off a bit more in OT as well as IT environments, which is quite interesting.
Guys, I'll jump in. I see a couple of questions have popped in around plans to integrate either Illumio or Appgate with Forescout. And then a corollary question, I think, that popped in from a separate user is, can Appgate provide ZTNA IoT security? So let me answer from the Appgate perspective, and then we'll let Paul jump in as well. Absolutely, Appgate can provide ZTNA security for IoT devices. We do it through something that we call a connector. There's actually a demonstration that I could give. If you're interested, you can reach out through the Appgate website or the contacts that you've learned here, and we'll be happy to set something up. Back to the Forescout question. So I would say there's a yes and a no response on the Appgate side. So there's no formal plan to integrate with Forescout. However, if you're a Forescout customer, and I would say this, take Forescout out of the answer and put any vendor in. But if you're a Forescout customer and you deem Forescout to be a a focal point of trustworthy information. Let me just put it like that. If you think Forescout has information about your environment, your world, your network that's really, really critical, important, and trustworthy, and that data is accessible via an API call, then Appgate can absolutely take advantage of that data by issuing an API call to the Forescout platform and pulling that data back into Appgate. So there are no plans to do an integration like I just demonstrated with Illumio, but you can take advantage of it through your own integration efforts, your own API scripting, if you will, by deploying Appgate and leveraging that API interface on the Forescout side. Paul, anything to add there about Illumio and Forescout?
No, the same thing that you've said. We are able to pull in any information that we can get in a CSV. We can pull it in. So many of our integrations with some of the IoT vendors will actually pull in their map. We'll actually be able to write policy to their map. So we can pull in a policy IoT map, or we can actually export our policies and our labels. So the IoT providers want us for the labels. They don't have any capabilities to mention what objects should I protect who should I protect the medical devices from? Well, I don't want them to be allowed from the IT people. I don't want them to be allowed to the end users, but I do want to allow them to be used to the biomed technician. So we provide those labels to be used in something like a Forescout or any other tool like that. I see another question on here. Can Illumio be used in an incident response? I can answer that one. Absolutely. That's one of our best use cases. We have two ways to do it. One is to be proactive and put it in place ahead of time. So many of our customers have gotten Illumio in place. And when an incident response happens, they just shut down that area. Second thing is we can do it as a reactive. We have a policy set up with a couple of different companies that we can actually come in as an incident response recovery and isolate and stop that attack from flowing. Most of the incident response companies, they talk about milliseconds, but their recovery time from a complete recovery from a ransomware incident is in between 6 to 13 weeks. And Illumio can significantly shorten that dwell time to make sure the environment is completely clear, down to probably 3 to 4 weeks in that sort of a size incident.
Yeah, it's pretty, and I think it's important from sort of pulling back to the R again on that sort of modern SOC generation. So I think to think of the concept of pre-breach and post-breach when you're planning these things, planning for an unhappy path, absolutely all the time, but certainly be on the front foot, then the planning side of things from a pre-breach point of view, okay, this is what things should be like, all being good, but also looking for everything from threat-based. But then also post-breach, what are those, what are your procedures from that point of view? And often that I've found that post-breach often isn't, or certainly isn't all about the technology. Post-breach is about rigor, is effectively, it's people and process. And how well have you enacted it in the past? How well have you practiced it before? And certainly that's something that we sort of like will always preach with our customers is that, you know, if we're in there integrated, in some cases we're integrated into people's SOCs, or we're running the SOC ourselves, and we pride ourselves on that ability to sort of like go through that and to be absolutely on the button at that point. Afterwards, everybody knows what their role is within that thing, and then how to actually get to that point. Time to remediation, to shorten that window right down. Any more questions have we got in there? I can't see from here because I'm presenting on the screen.
Miles, I think there's one that may apply more to DXC. Do you offer an assessment to show a prospect how it works and where it may be vulnerable?
Yeah, so yeah, really good point. In fact, actually, the cloud secure platform now from Illumio is the best way of doing this, because you don't actually have to drop anything in. So a lot of the time, what DXC will do is like a proof of value or proof of concept, and that will often require the ability to install some stuff here and there to do that. Now, that's often a bit of a no-no. That's difficult. And don't forget, I was the guy on the other side of the fence for years, and I didn't let anybody install anything on anything that was mine. It was like, yeah, on your bike, mate. This is my stuff. And the fact is, with cloud security, it's such a great way to understand what's going on within your cloud environment. whatever the cloud is that you're using at that time, purely by giving read-only access. So you don't have to deploy agents, you don't have to find a span port, you don't have to do anything. You purely have read-only access to that tenant, and that can start drawing and mapping exactly how those dependencies are put together. It can also be the point where you go, oh my goodness, look at that. Look at the lateral movement. I had absolutely no idea that that tier of servers across there could all talk to each other and across to everything else. Don't forget, what we're always talking about here is that containment. We kind of know someone's going to get in at some point. And as I said, it's how quick you get off the canvas. How quick can you contain that and stop that spreading? So yeah, we would definitely talk to us, DXC, from that point of view. And we can work with you on that idea of sort of like that first look. Let's ascertain what it's like. What does it look like at the moment, and then you can decide on what you do. And as we said before, we're like with banking, a lot of big financial institutions haven't deployed everything everywhere. They've gone in and they've thought about, right, what's really important to me? Okay, it's the SWIFT payment system. What's going to get me into trouble with the compliance? It's these platforms. Let me focus on those things first. But you don't know that stuff first unless you do some sort of exercise to start with. So yeah, absolutely, DXC can do something like that for people if they're interested, for sure.
I think we've killed all the questions.
That's not bad.
Thank you, fellas. It's been a good hour.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us come on and do this. It's been interesting for us, and thanks for putting questions in there. And please reach out if there's anything of interest that's come around from this.